with God, we our account of like what God has done, right? It's all just coming from Him. So we don't have
Well,
background
what he's like,
information. We
not
yeah
so
we
much what he's done as what he's like.
Okay, sure. So we don't have any background information about His nature that doesn't come from Him,
Right.
and the other.
Or God's generally, right? Because like in human
Oh,
beings,
okay, sure.
if with human beings, right, we could say, I've never met this human being before,
Hmm.
right? So how do I know what he's like? Well, right, I might say, well, most human beings share these properties, or all human beings share these properties, or most
Yeah.
human beings in this region
Hmm.
share these
Yep.
properties, right? But with God, we don't have any background information about what they are like, other than what they might tell us about what they're like.
Right. So I misspoke there. I didn't mean to frame it as a problem for specific theism as opposed to general theism. So I understand it's about gods, not just God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So the two symmetry breakers are that you don't have information about the nature of gods that doesn't just derive from gods, and then the second is that
Derived
since
from their utterances.
oh, sorry, derived from their utterances. Okay, and then the second is that you don't have oh yeah, gods don't have bodies, so there's not this ability to like empirically confirm their intentional states by what their body is doing.
Yeah, see, there's a thesis called radical interpretation in the philosophy of language, which is the idea of, it's basically sort of like a set of questions about what would be the necessary conditions to allow us to interpret a speech community where we didn't have any translations, but we're starting from scratch, right?
Mm.
Like they're speaking a language, we don't know any words in that language, right?
Yeah.
But yet, is there a way to actually interpret them from scratch, right? And so Davidson, who worked this out, right, he makes the argument that what we do, right, is first of all, we we'll start looking for patterns, right? Maybe there'll be a word that, or what sounds like a word, right, that is like correlated with some object in the environment, right? So we hear when people say the word gavagai, that's correlated with a rabbit being in their vicinity, right? And so then we construct the hypothesis, maybe gavagai means rabbit, right?
Hmm.
But of course, because of underdetermination, gavagai could mean something more
Incoming
general than
chat.
rabbit. It could mean like four-legged animal, say. And it could also mean something more specific, right? It could mean rabbit foot, right?
Mm.
So then what we do is engage in, what Mill called the method of differences, right? Where we like look for behavioral evidence that's consistent or inconsistent with those different interpretive hypotheses. We think, oh, well, if Gavagai really meant four-legged animal rather than rabbit, why wouldn't it be uttered under these conditions, right? And if it really meant rabbit foot rather than rabbit, right, why wouldn't it be uttered under these conditions, right? So as a way of testing the hypothesis, right, we could look for evidence that's more consistent with one hypothesis than another, and that'll increase the likelihood of the hypothesis, right? And over time, you're just constantly refining your hypotheses, right? You have a greater and greater probability that some lexicon and descriptive grammar that you've constructed um, is accurately reproducing the rules of their language, right?
Hmm. Yep.
But if you take the bodies of the members of the speech community away, right? How are you able to do that?
Hmm.
You can't coordinate events in or states of affairs in the environment with the agent because you need the body to do that coordinating. And two, you can't look for behavioral evidence that's inconsistent with certain interpretive hypotheses, because you need a body for there to be behavior to be attributing intentional explanations to, right?
Okay.
And so that's the reason why there's a disanalogy with respect to embodiment.
Okay, so yeah, now I guess there's two things I would say there. So the first is just that your first disanalogy relies on the concept of background information. So I just need a distinction between background information and just information. And then the second was just when you're talking about the disanalogy in terms of having a body. I mean, I don't know if he temporarily had a body when he was Jesus. That might be a pathway someone could go down there. But someone might say, like, you invoke the concept of behavior, right? Someone might say that there's still like behavior that we know God is engaged in, even if he doesn't have a body. So we still have the behavior to go off as like an empirical verifier. So yeah, I want clarity on background information versus information, and I want clarity on why a body is necessary for behavior.
Well, if somebody utters a speech act, right, or at least we hear sounds, or we see marks on a page that they've drawn, right? That's information, right?
Sure.
But what we want is background information that we already have about them, not new information that we are acquiring about them, right? But information that we already have. That's what I mean by background information, right? So like if there's a note that says pick up a dozen eggs on your way home, that's written in my mother's handwriting, right? I have background information about what her handwriting is like. And
Okay.
I also, have like very good reasons to think that she's not a German spy trying to leave me a message in code, and all this stuff, right? So that's what allows me to,
Mm-hmm.
It's not like I have to
Okay.
go and construct hypotheses, which I then test, which will give me new information, right, to make it possible to interpret that. I can just appeal to background facts that I already have.
Okay, so the distinction between background and non-background information is whether the information originates from the person whose intentional states you're trying to understand.
Well, it could be about people in general, right? I have background information about what human beings are like, or what human beings in particular
Right. Wait,
places.
what? But so what do you say, like, when someone says I have information about what God is like because I take the Bible to be an accurate historical account?
That's what I'm saying is arguing in a circle.
Wait, but
Right.
is that, I just, sorry, what I want to be clear on is that not background information?
So you
Because
could say, right, if I had facts about what God was really like, right, you could say that's background information, right? But we would then ask the question, how was that acquired?
okay, but someone might say, like, look, if someone says the Bible's an accurate historical account and they don't actually appeal to God to say that it's an accurate historical account, then they're just going to get that background information on the table without appealing to God or his utterance.
No, the point is,
there's a way in which, saying
Oh,
a
your sound
historical
is so
account.
brutal. Is he like this for everyone, or is it just
Yeah, that's a problem.
Oh, I feel bad for you, dude. I'm sorry.
Wait, what's the issue?
It's just your sound. You're a bit better now.
You were just
Oh,
rolling.
I
I
was.
can understand you, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was in an elevator. What I was saying is, that's sort of question begging to say it's an accurate historical account, right? Because for it to be a historical account, presumably it has to be composed of propositions. But the meaning, whether or not it is even composed of propositions, is what's in question in the first place.
Well, no, but
Right.
they're saying that God didn't divinely author or inspire the Bible, just like humans.
Right. Like look, if the first, let's just focus in on the first and we'll come around to the body thing after. So with the issue of background information, like look, presumably you guys don't want your view to also cut against humans, right? Like this argument is supposed to cut against God, but not against humans. You can interpret the human intentional states, not God's intentional states, right?
That might just be a too colloquial way, but yeah, let's go with that.
It's interpreting utterances.
Sorry. Okay. So sorry. The idea though is that like there's supposed to be a disanalogy here. Obviously, you keep saying the word disanalogy, so it's supposed to be the case that this cuts against our ability to interpret God's utterances, but not the utterances of humans.
That's correct.
Right. So if the first basis, like the symmetry breaker, the disanalogy, is the thing that explains why this applies to God but not to humans, right? So if the first symmetry breaker is that there is no background information for God, right, or about God, then you have to have some kind of definition of background information by which we're not going to be able to say that we have the same kind of background information about God as we do for humans, right? So like if just historical facts count as background information, then someone who takes the Bible to be an accurate historical account, they don't have to take it to be an accurate historical account because God uttered it, right? There doesn't have to be question begged there. Just someone who, for whatever reason, takes it to be an accurate historical account. On their view, there are going to be those true facts about God that would allow you to interpret his intentional states. So this is why I say, like, there's got to be some response to that, some definition of background information that excludes, that precludes someone from being able to say an accurate historical account of the Bible is an accurate historical account, and that counts as background information. So that could either somehow be part of the argument, there could be some reason built in, or you could just say that this argument comes coupled with another argument against taking the Bible to be an accurate historical account.
The issue is, right, when you say the Bible is about God, right, it's accurately reporting facts about God, right? Presumably what that means is that it's accurately reporting facts about what God has said.
Well, I mean, it could report facts about what God has done.
Question is, how would we know that God did them if not from what God said about himself? Because he doesn't have a body, right? So when we say God did it, right? When we say X did something, right? Talking about a human being, right? We're able to make that connection because they have a body that allows us to coordinate some event with things that they've done, right? But in God's case, he doesn't have a body. So
okay, I follow, but I think I have a reply to that. Sorry to cut you off, but I just want to hear you address this. So, someone what they might say, right? They might make some separate argument and tell you, look, my basis for thinking that the Bible gives an accurate account of like some true facts about God, it's not. I don't take that to be the case because God is the one who uttered sentences that show up in the Bible. I take it to be the case by, like, I don't know, maybe they'd say there's some like process of elimination for what accounts for events, and that, you know, a supernatural being is the best explanation, right? They could come up with some argument for why the Bible is an accurate historical account that includes facts about God that doesn't appeal to God's utterances, right? It could be maybe they have a process of elimination argument or something. Like, sorry to cut you off there too, but that's my point there.
Yeah, so I think it's not going to be possible for them to construct an argument in which they say that there's a certain set of events, right, that are best explained by a divine being, that they could attribute to that divine being without facts about the nature of the divine being, because the fact that there's a divine being would be consistent with any set of facts, right?
The existence of a divine being
equally consistent, right? So look,
yeah.
If I encounter a strange set of facts, right, and then I say, okay, maybe a divine being explains that, right? It's not going to be evidence for that divine being existing, that there's that set of facts, because a divine being existing doesn't actually predict those outcomes, right? A divine being is consistent with any set of outcomes, right? So what they could do is construct a just so story, right? They could say, well, the reason why, improbably enough, there's a block of cheese in the center of Red Square in Moscow is because there's a being that had the desire for there to be a block of red cheese in the middle of Red Square, has the ability to do so, and is practically rational, and so forth, right? But then that's just a just so story, right? So that just so stories aren't actually good explanatory hypotheses, right?
Okay.
So it's hard to see how they could have a good explanatory hypothesis unless they had already some prior facts about the nature of the agent, right?
Okay. Well, see, this is what I mean when I say, like, if the argument is going to come coupled with our other arguments, that's one thing, right? So if you're going to bring separate arguments to bear about why we can't have any kind of knowledge of what God has done or of his nature, right? If there's some kind of argument for why the only way we could have knowledge of God's nature is by the only method for doing that would require knowledge of his intentional states to begin with, then I guess that would be one thing. But I mean, it seems like you have to be ruling out like any other argument that says that we can, determine.
The issue is that the appealing to the Bible is just pushing the question one step back, right? Because what we're doing is saying, okay, we have facts about what God believes and desires, right? The question is, how do we acquire facts about what God believes and desires? We don't actually need the Bible, right, to have to deal with that question.
Wait, but no. The thing I'm trying to get on the table is what you say. Look, once there's background information, you can start basically verifying their intentional states on your view, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can't have some understanding of background information that would allow there to be background information about God. So the problem is that in order to get background information on the table, like I don't need to just get on the table something about God's intentional states. I just need to get on the table just some true fact about God, right? So
no, it has to be a fact about what God believes and desires.
Right? Wait, but in the context of humans, you verify their intentional states via like non-intentional things, right?
Well, the thing is, though, is that those are going to have implications with respect to what beliefs and desires they could have.
But wait, you said that maybe I'm misunderstanding something. It sounded to me like you said that you verify whether your hypothesis about their intentional states is true by examining their behavior, right?
Yeah, but the point is that given certain intentional states that I attribute to them, right, I can then see whether their behavior is consistent or inconsistent.
Right. the ingredients though are you making some interpretation about their intentional state, and you having access to some behavior they've done, right?
Yeah.
So all that someone has to get on the table is that God has done some behavior, right? They don't have to start from some intentional state about God and beg the question. They can just somehow make some kind of argument for just, I don't know, why the Bible's an accurate historical account, or why they know something to be, attributable to God. They don't have to say that, they don't have to reference his intentions at all. They just have to get some true fact on the table about his nature, or what he's done, or his acts, or something.
No, the behavior allows us to verify whether some interpretive hypothesis is correct or not.
Right. So if we have evidence of God behaving in some way, that would allow us to start verifying if our hypotheses about his intentional states are correct, right?
Yes.
So all they would have to get on the table is that God has behaved in some way at some point. So they don't have to invoke intentional states, right? They can just be like, I just think it's true that God parted the Red Sea or something.
Yeah, if you thought God parted the Red Sea, right, and you thought God was an omnipotent being, and you thought God had the desire to not part the Red Sea, and you thought God was a rational agent, right, then you would say that's inconsistent with that hypothesis.
Yes. Yeah, no, I fully follow you there. So all I'm saying is that, like, we have this argument that comes out with the conclusion that we can't interpret God's utterances, right? And it's supposed to be the case that we can interpret the utterances of humans. And there's two analogy breakers, right? And the first one is that we have this background information in the case of humans that allows us to verify whether our hypotheses about their intentional states are correct, right? And that background information just consists of, just true facts about their actions, or what they've done, right? So what someone who what a theist would have to do is just get on the table some true facts about what God has done, like parted the Red Sea. So what you would require is additional arguments for why we don't have any true facts about what God's done, not just about his intentional states. We don't have any true facts about any of his acts.
Yeah, but I don't really see how we could attribute actions to God without God having a body.
Oh, sorry. My bad. Say again. Without God telling us?
Without God having a body, right? Or God telling us.
Well, yeah. Like, I look, just to be clear, like, if it's not known, like, I am an atheist, and I'm like, I don't think that there's a persuasive argument for, like, interpreting anything as coming from God. But all I'm showing is just that you would, if you're making this argument, right, you just additionally need arguments, or an argument for why we can't have any knowledge, or maybe knowledge is not the best word to use, but we just, let's just say that for now. We can't have any knowledge about God's actions, just any descriptive knowledge of like anything about God outside of his intentional states. You'd need to also have that be the case, or else there would be background information.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, yeah. So this is kind of what I was saying yesterday. So if those additional arguments are there and you're aware of their need, then there's not any disagreement there. And then just with the second premise, or sorry, no, it's not a premise, it's an analogy breaker. So there's this question of whether them having a body is essential for basically for behavior, right? Because you're saying the behavior is the thing you use to verify the intentional states, and you take it to be behavior if a human's body does something, but you're apparently, like, presumably on your view, you must not take it as behavior when like an earthquake happens and someone says God did that, right? So it's just kind of the same thing, where there has to be, like, either some basis for only a body being able to for us only being able to use bodies to see behavior, or for sorry, let me think. There'd have to be an argument for why we can only for why behavior is just exclusively defined as what a body does, right? Or some kind of case, if that's not the case, at minimum for why nothing, like no natural event that someone attributes to God or something is behavior. So there'd have to be, I could say that better if I thought about it for a moment. Was that clear? Or should I do that more clearly?
No, I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. So it can't be that like we have evidence of God's behavior, right? If someone thinks miracles happen, for example, right, they'd consider that a behavior from God, right? So you'd either need an argument for why bodily behavior is the exclusive way to verify intentional states, or you'd need some argument for why miracles don't exist and stuff like this, so you can't say a miracle is God's behavior.
Well, I think the issue with miracles is that there's never a principled basis by which to interpret an unexplained event as a miracle rather than a falsification of some set of beliefs that we have about the natural order, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I fully agree with that, right? But that's just you providing exactly the additional argument that I'm getting at, right? Which is an argument for why miracles aren't God's behavior, and you'd also need to argue that we have no other example of God's behavior.
They could be God's behavior, right? It just doesn't seem like we'd ever have a principled reason for thinking.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, if it's like that, yeah, like I don't care if it's a full on this is not God's behavior or just there's no basis for thinking it is. Like either of those would satisfy me, right? Sorry?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, like either of those would be fine. Like just pushing it to the point of like we just don't have any knowledge about it, that's totally reasonable. But you'd have to do that with miracles and like any other instance of that is said by the theist to be God's behavior, right? You need a way to either explain why all of those things aren't behavior or explain why bodily behavior is like the exclusive way to verify intentional states.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know if we disagree. Like, if you agree with what I'm saying in terms of like just the supporting arguments that need to be there, then that's totally fine. I will say that Vic was not delivering these supporting arguments.
I think he might have been. Yeah, I think he might have been trying to press the objection using a different line of argument that we haven't actually really worked out that line.
Yeah, but I like fair enough, totally. I liked listening to him talk. It was a good conversation. But yeah, so if ultimately the position is, yeah, you have this argument, can't know the intention, or sorry, you can't verify the utterances of a being whose intentional states you can't know. You can't know God's intentional states, so you can't interpret his utterances. And then the basis for supporting that second premise that you can't know God's intentional states is there's not any reason why it would simultaneously apply to humans. Like you have supporting separate arguments for why we can know the intentional states of humans, right? There's like a good solid analogy breaker there. That's fine. Like I just the main thing for me is just that those external arguments are going to be needed there, or else people will say things like, oh, the miracle is an evidence of God's behavior. That's a way to verify his intentional state. Or what was the earlier one? Yeah, or just like the Bible is an accurate historical account. There's some true facts about God. I'm verifying his intentions from that. Yeah. So I don't think we're disagreeing. Is there anything I'm saying that sounds objectionable to you?
No, it might in a way be easier to proceed Socratically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which, if you encountered somebody who said, here's a verse in some religious scripture that accurately describes God's beliefs and desires, and this is the correct way to interpret it, right? You could just start asking the question, okay, how do you justify that, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you keep asking those questions, eventually it's going to come down to them just having like some kind of assumption that they can't really
Hmm.
get out for, you know.
Yep. Yeah, I agree that a very good response to people bringing up these challenges is just to, instead of saying that can't be the case, which saddles you with this uncomfortable sort of burden of proof, to like basically like falsify all of these, possible examples of God's behavior or whatever. You can just be Socratic about it and just say, okay, well, maybe that's the case. Can you actually, like give me that account?
Yeah, you can just sort of like imagine here's somebody who's interpreting it this way,
Hmm.
right? Let's imagine a hypothetical agent who interpreted this way. What could you do to show that their interpretation was wrong, right? And so if you bring in the considerations that this argument is trying to raise with respect to all those issues, right? Like how do you justify some interpretive hypothesis without arguing in a circle, right? I think
Hmm.
they're gonna get into trouble pretty fast, right?
Yeah, there's a separate point which I like, I think is a lot easier on your view to defend, but there's some kind of view that might say what we're interested in when it comes to interpretation is not actually knowing what God meant, but just like understanding it relative to like our knowledge system. Like someone might say when we're trying to decode the alien language, we're not our goal isn't to understand what the aliens mean. It's just to understand what it comes out like within our system of language. Now, like I don't think that's a very good objection, because I think that you can just be like, well, why would you want to do that? Like presumably you actually want to know what God intends. But that would just be another thing someone could do, is just say like, well, by interpretation, I'm not talking about reading their intentional states.
Well, I'm okay, but that's a whole other can of worms, right? I'm starting from the assumption that what it means
Yeah.
to interpret an utterance correctly is to um, discern what they meant by the utterance, and therefore to discern their intention.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
somebody could try to challenge that, which would be a whole different argument,
right.
right?
This is why I said earlier there was kind of like, I briefly touched on the fact that there was this other line of discussion that happened, and it was that basically, but it was like less meaningful an objection than the other two. So yeah, like I mean, someone can try to push on whether they agree with your understand with your interpretation of what interpretation means, but yeah, I mean, it seems like not that meaningful an objection to me, at least, because I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that what I'm interested in when I'm trying to interpret someone's utterances is what they in fact meant by it, not like what it means relative to my language system or stuff
Yeah,
like this. It's
I
just worth
think the
being
common
aware of.
yeah, I
And you,
think the
you
common
obviously are aware of it, so because you said you're assuming your starting point. But yeah, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think the common sense view, if you just talk to the average person on the street, right,
Hmm.
and they would say, yeah, when I'm interpreting what an utterance means, what I'm doing is figuring out what the person who wrote it was trying to say, right? I think that would be the common sense view. It's actually really only philosophers
Yeah.
who are likely to to question that account, right?
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. No. I mean, I agree with that. Like a normal person, like the what's that? Like if you go ask your grandma or whatever, like your grandma is just going to say, well, you want to know like what they mean, right? Like so. Yeah, I agree. That's how the average person would see it. Okay. Well, I'm not detecting any
Sorry, guys, I'm
disagreement
listening
here.
to a debate on a Discord server.
Hammy, you got to mute your mic, dude.
But I'd recommend getting this recording that Manny has that I did on Sunday,
Okay.
because I probably go into a little bit more detail on some of these points there. And so
Mm.
if you're find yourself bored with nothing to listen to, you might find that helps clarify um, some of the things we talked over.
Sure. Yeah. Totally. So, someone link me that. And what about you, Jack? Are you detecting any other areas where we're not converging here?
No, I mean, obviously these are like there's like a lot of different complicated issues at every sort of step, that could be, gone into further, but I think broadly speaking, no, this is a recording that you made in here, Manny. I'm talking about the recording that we have of about the interpretation argument that was made on Sunday. Give that to Isaac.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear that. I think someone did link that to me, but I wasn't registering what it was at the time. I thought it was just like some random debate. Okay, and then actually, I won't hijack the religion conversation, but you and I also need to do a bit of an ethics conversation because I think I've listened over our debate, and I think that there's some issues on both parts. But we can do that another time if you want to continue with the religion stuff here.
This is not actually the most convenient time for me right now. It's very easy for me to get sucked in when, because I'm sort of interested in clarifying, but it's often against my better judgment because I'm thinking, well, I have stuff to do right now, and this is like, it doesn't allow me to multitask easily,
Absolutely, 100%. I will make two statements, though. You don't have to respond to them now, but you can just like think on them because these are the things I want to basically raise. So there's one thing that I was not understanding properly and that you were right on in that conversation. And that is, so there's kind of two segments. The first was about name the trait and the second was about particularism. And I kind of allowed myself to fall into this frame of like arguing against particularism. I don't know what I was thinking really there, but what I was saying did not make sense, right? So it's not the case that sorry, just let me recall the objection. It's not the case that because in principle particularism could justify anything that I have some kind of problem with particularism because in principle generalism could justify anything. So the one thing is that I just concede that you're right about that. And then the other is that I think that there was a confusion, and this it wasn't obvious to me that this was a confusion until I later heard some discussions with Manny and some other people about the reductio on saying that the trait is preference, right? So I don't think it's clear what was being meant when I said that the trait, there's a reductio on the trait being preference. There was this kind of in my view, as a subjectivist, like uncontroversial meta-ethical statement that was being made that it's like, well, it's just a tautology that if your views were different, they'd be different. And, I don't understand how that's a reductio because that's no more true of, it's as true of your position as it is of mine, right? So the problem is that that's not actually a response to the reductio because when you name the trait as preferences, what you're saying is not just a meta-ethical claim that norms are hypothetical, that they derive from preferences. What you're saying is actually a normative claim. This is what name the trait is asking for, and it's clarified in the wording of the question, which I could walk through with you if we ever get into this. But what you're actually asking for is a normative claim. So you're not just saying, so there's this sentence, which would be preferences determine what's ethical, or you might not like the word preferences, but we'll just go with that for a second. Preferences determine what's ethical. And there's a meta-ethical interpretation of that, and there's a normative interpretation of that. Now, the meta-ethical interpretation, to me as a subjectivist, sorry to repeat myself, not controversial. It's obviously true that norms are hypothetical and derived from preferences, but then there's a normative claim, right? And what it means to say in a normative context that preferences determine what's ethical is that I have a hypothetical norm that whatever I prefer is ethical, right? And it's possible to hold the meta-ethical view but not make that further normative claim. And it was totally not intentional, and I did not catch it out and point it out properly because I wasn't fully understanding, but there was an unintentional equivocation that happened there which didn't allow the reductio to properly land. So you don't have to address that if you're busy, but those are the things that I would like to talk through when we do have time.
Okay, well, we can try to sort that out. But I think, Manny and Vic and Josh can represent my view correctly if you happen to speak to them about it before I get a chance to talk to you.
So in my view, and I don't say this with any shade, I've pushed Manny into a corner on this, and I don't think that he actually understands what I'm saying. So I would be interested to try to get it through to you.
Okay.
But I am happy to talk more to Manny, though. Obviously, I like Manny.
Okay, good.
No worries. Okay, well, it's great talking to all you guys. Glad we cleared some things up. Yeah, have a good one. Oh, wait, no, one other thing. Jack, will you debate perspective sophistry? Have you thought about that at all?
Oh, I need to talk to Manny and Young a little bit more about whether it's worth bothering with. But yeah, I haven't.
That's okay. I'm just pressuring you. No big deal. But yeah, it would be really funny because he's just a massive sophist. You destroy him, and he kind of does what you don't like. He goes around trying to pick fights with noobs, just like what Darth does, like going trying to get in meta ethical debates with Banana Warrior Princess. It's like, well, it would be nice to see someone who knows what they're talking about smack him around. Like I've done it twice, and if I can do it, I'm sure you can do it. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good talking though. Have a good one, guys.
All right. See you later.